I accidentally glued them in the wrong order. It makes me feel very smart. The mansion has some spooky stuff going on. That's when I cry. Hello everyone, my name's Ebani. Welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be discussing all of the books that I read in January. I read a total of 12 books. I am going to show you my wrap-up page in the new bullet journal. Let me preface, there are supposed to be book covers here. I accidentally glued them in the wrong order. So when I went to take them off, they tore. So when I print February's pages, I'll print extra of these and fix it. And now I haven't actually made a stats page for this journal yet. I'm so behind on like yearly pages I need to make for this journal. So I will just tell you that I read 9 audiobooks in January, and then that means I read 3 physical books. I don't know how many pages because I did not calculate it. And then I also read 2 rereads. One of the rereads is I read the book for the first time in January, but then I read it again. We'll get to it when we get there. So let's just jump on into all the books I read in January. So to kick off the new year, I reread one of my favorite books of all time, Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. And yes, I do have a second copy, like right here where my hand is. So you can see that my 2 different copies, and they're both beautiful. And I really want to get the, I think it's a Barnes & Noble like exclusive edition, but it's got a red cover and it's very similar to the pink one, but it's red. I really want to get it because I am in love with this book. So I read this book for I believe it was the 6th time that I've ever read it. And it was the first book I picked up at the beginning of the year purposefully because I wanted so badly, like last fall, to reread it, but I knew that I had way too many books to get through before the end of the year, and I still didn't complete like all the books I wanted to read like on my 2021 TBR, so I didn't end up picking it up. But then when the new year started, I was like, oh, we've got like this whole new year to read books, so I decided that this would be the first book that I read. And of course it lived up to the hype. I am in love with this book. Basically, if you don't know, this book follows a girl named Kath who is like really struggling with the transition from like into college. She has like pretty severe social anxiety, but this book is kind of just about like the struggle that she goes through and also just her life in college, and I love that. I love slice of life books. They are absolutely one of my favorite things. That's why I love contemporary so much. And also, fun fact, so Rainbow Rowell is from Omaha, which is where I currently live, and she does a lot of events through the bookstore that I work at. It's awesome. Another one of the things I love about this book so much is that the characters, they go to UNL, which is in Lincoln, but they're from Omaha. They're from the area that I live in. I don't know, it's just so crazy and awesome, and that's one of the things I love about this book because it's so relatable to me. Fun fact, my bookstore that I work at actually gets a shout out in this book. It's called The Bookworm, and they mention it like towards the end of the book, and it's so awesome. I never noticed that until this time because I've read this book several times, like I said, but I never noticed it until this reread because I haven't reread it since I got this job. So like I never really like, you know, caught that until now. So that was really exciting, something new. But yeah, I love this book so much. It's probably like, it's definitely in my top 5 favorite books of all time. It might be like number 2 or number 3. It's really high up there as one of my favorites. And fun fact, I'm actually rereading it again, like currently, but I'm reading it with Will. I'm just so excited that I'm making Will read it, of course. So no surprise here, but of course I gave it 5 stars. Okay, so then I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is an interesting story. It kind of just follows a character who works at a convenience store, and you know, that's her life. It's just very, very slice of life, which I enjoyed because like I said, I enjoy that kind of story. It was very short, and I remember when I finished it, I kind of felt like there was a bigger like meaning that I was missing. I'm like, am I missing, you know, like, and not that the book was like bad or anything, I just thought that maybe I misread it, especially since I listened to the audiobook, because sometimes I miss things on audiobooks that I, you know, like probably would have caught if I read it physically. So I asked my coworker, and because this is one of her favorite books and that's why I decided to read it, and she said that there wasn't really like a bigger meaning, and that's kind of the point, is that this woman who is like supposed to be able to live her life, and it shouldn't have like a bigger meaning. Because like a lot of the characters in the book don't agree with the way that the convenience store woman lives her life, and that's kind of the point. And so I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I gave it 3 stars because it was kind of just like a middle of the road, like good, enjoyable book. And like I said, I kind of liked that there was no like overall meaning or like moral of the story. Like I kind of liked things just being the way they are and it being okay for that to happen. Okay, and then I read Attachments by Rainbow Rowell. This was a month to read Rainbow Rowell, I suppose. If you watched my giant book haul that I posted a while ago, which also I need to post another book haul because we're getting up there in new books. Anyway, I purchased this book from one of my coworkers who was, you know, like getting rid of some of the books she didn't want to hang on to anymore. And so I bought this one, but I hadn't read this one. I think it was one of the few Rainbow Rowell books I hadn't gotten to yet, aside from her Runaways series. I think that that's the only other ones that I haven't read at this point. And I still need to read Anyway the Wind Blows. Yeah, so I gave this one a go. It's about a character named Lincoln who works at this company, and his job is to read emails that get flagged by the system for having like specific words in them, just to make sure that it's not like hateful or, you know, not something that's bad for like the work environment. And so he reads these emails between these 2 girls, I think their names are Beth and Jennifer, and takes an interest in their lives. And so he continues to read all of their emails, like even the ones that don't get flagged, and he kind of starts to feel like he is their friend, even though like they have no idea who he is. He like gets really invested into their lives, and so that kind of is where like this story kicks off in a way. And it was an interesting way to propel a story. Like I hadn't really thought of, you know, like people like reading your emails but I mean, I suppose it does happen. And so yeah, I did really like the creativity of this story. It is also set in Omaha, so I also enjoyed that aspect of it. And there was some romance in here that I really enjoyed as well. So overall, this was a great book for me, and I gave it 4 stars. Alright, and then I read Yolk by Mary H.K. Choi. I was so excited to read this book because I had heard that there was some eating disorder representation in it, and so I was like, oh yes, you know me, I mean, I really like books that have eating disorder representation. So I was, you know, really pumped for this one. Also, like, look at the cover, like the pages have like they're holding hands, like look, hands. Whoa. Anyway, so I had high expectations for this book, and unfortunately it didn't quite deliver on those. So this book is about 2 Korean American sisters who, one of the sisters commits insurance fraud because she was recently diagnosed with cancer. It's kind of like the journey of the sisters and their relationship. The other sister, the one who's not sick, also does technically have an eating disorder, but that's like brought up occasionally, but then it's just immediately dropped again for another 50 pages, and then it's brought up once and then dropped. I took some notes while I was reading this because I was so like kind of confused on what was happening. So I literally wrote, what is the plot doing? Because the characters kept doing things that didn't feel related to like cancer plotline or the eating disorder plotline. Like there was a lot going on about these sisters' lives like separately and also together, and like their family, that had nothing to do with what I felt was the main like conflict of the story. I was just really confused on like how everything related to each other, and I gave this one 3 stars because I don't know, I enjoyed like some of it, but then some of it I was like, what's going on? Ultimately, it kind of just feels like a story about sisters. It doesn't really feel like a story about like eating disorders or a story about her cancer or her insurance fraud. I have previously read a different Mary H.K. Choi book. I think it was Emergency Contact, and I wasn't a huge fan of that one either, but I decided to give her another try because I had heard like about how the eating disorder representation in this, and I was really excited to read that, but I don't know, it just didn't mesh with me. So I gave it 3 stars. It was alright. Okay, and then I read The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. This is another book that I kind of felt average about. I'd heard a lot about this book in like October-ish, like during Halloween, which totally fits because this is definitely a spooky book. Basically, it's set in like, I don't know if there's like a specific like timeline, but it's definitely in like Britain during like a more historical period. Like it's not during the modern day. And so because of that, like the narrator of the audiobook did have a British accent, and I kind of struggle when narrators of audiobooks have British accents because I have to listen to it on a slower speed so I can make sure I'm understanding understanding everything. So the main character, Jane, is an assistant to a doctor, and they have this sort of like arrangement where they're gonna get married, but it's not like romantic, it's more, you know, like mutually beneficial arrangement, but it does kind of become romantic at times. And so she moves into his house for a brief period, and some spooky things start happening. That's all I can really say about it because that's all I really remember. Yeah, I don't know. I was hoping that this book would be more spooky and more exciting, I guess. Like, I wasn't super interested in what was happening, unfortunately. Now, I don't think that that's the book's fault. I think that it's, you know, my fault. Like, I just don't think that this story meshed with me too well, especially because I don't really like books set in like an older time period, so I think that was part of the problem. But anyway, now that I'm really looking at it, the cover is pretty cool though. There's some really interesting things on the cover. I don't really have anything else to say about it. It just was kind of average and middle of the road for me, so I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Extraordinary by V.E. Schwab. So this is a graphic novel that takes place in between the books Vicious and Vengeful, which, if you didn't know, Vicious was my absolute favorite book that I read last year. Obviously, I was gonna read anything else that had to do with it, so I ordered a copy from the store that I work at, and oh my goodness, I loved it. It was by far one of my favorite graphic novels. I loved the art style of it. Here, let me show you, hold up a picture. Like, look at how cool that looks. And I don't know, it was just so awesome. Look at it. Ah! It also does have a like short story in the back called Warm Up, which is also another story like set in this universe. Yeah, basically, so Vicious and Vengeful follow these 2 characters, Victor and Eli, who discover how to become an EO, or an extraordinary person, which is basically like you get superpowers essentially. And yeah, there's a lot that happens in Vicious and Vengeful, and it's so good. But like, this book, like I said, takes place in between them, and it follows mostly new characters. Eli is a prevalent character in this book, and then Victor appears just briefly. But you do not have to have read Vicious and Vengeful to read this, because like what you do need to know from Vicious, it like kind of recaps in this book. So like you can read this book alone, and you don't have to read them like in chronological order, which is to say like Vicious and then this book and then Vengeful, because that would be like the order that they took place in, because obviously I did not read them that way. But you could. I think it would be a fun way to read it. So this graphic novel follows a new character, and her power is super awesome. I love following her, and it is just like a brief story. But yeah, I really enjoyed this graphic novel and the short story that's in the back of it. But I want to like point something out to you. So like, if you guys know, I love V.E. Schwab, right? Like, I'll read basically anything she writes. But anyway, when I was reading this, I was reading her like biography in the back of the book. And I don't know how well you'll be able to see it. Let me like put my finger next to it. But there is a typo in this book that I saw. Yeah, I don't know if my camera probably isn't even focusing on it, but it says translated, and the translated has 2 T's. So love that. Yeah, honestly, I love finding typos in books. It makes me feel very smart. But yeah, I love this book. I gave it 4 stars, and it's probably one of my favorite graphic novels that I've ever read. And then I read I'm Not Missing by Carrie Fountain. This was a difficult book for me to read because there's kind of like a long history behind this book. So I've had this book for quite a while. A friend of mine bought it when she was in New York for me like 2 or 3 years ago now, and it was kind of like a souvenir, you know, like from her trip to New York. But I never got around to reading it. And then unfortunately my friend and I had like a fallout my freshman year of college. That was a really tough time for me, and also I wrote a short story called She's Not Missing, loosely based off of not the premise of this book, but like the character in the story that I wrote had this book, and it was very much related to their friendship because, you know, based off of my real life. Since then, my friend and I have recently like reconnected, everything is fine, you know, whatever, but I still had never read this book, and so I decided to read it now. But it's weird having read it after going through all this stuff, and plus it being featured in a short story that I wrote. And so it's like, it's weird having all of my backstory about this book and then actually like finally reading this book, because of course this book has like nothing to do with like all of the backstory that I have, but it's, yeah, it was an interesting read. Basically, this book follows a girl named Miranda, and her best friend Sydney runs away, and she leaves a note that says, "I'm not missing. please don't look for me. And that's really rough on Miranda, obviously. And so throughout the book, she has to like deal with the fact that her friend has left, and there's like, you know, other events going on in her life as well. So I don't know, I felt middle of the road average about this book. I liked it more than I liked like The Death of Jane Lawrence. Like, it's more on like the higher end of a 3-star, but I felt like the book didn't know what its focus was. Like, I felt like it spent a lot of time on different parts of Miranda's life that didn't include Sydney and the fact that she ran away and like dealing with that. So it kind of felt like the book was trying to do multiple things at once. I did, for the most part, like it. I just had a few criticisms of it, obviously. But I definitely will hang on to this because, of course, it has a lot of history. Okay, and then I read Extraordinaries for a second time. And that is only because I wanted to read it with Will. Will's never read Vicious or Vengeful. Like I said, like, you don't have to have read those to read this, but I really enjoyed it, and I thought he would as well, because I thought he would appreciate like the art style and everything, so I wanted to read it with him. So I did read it a second time in January, but that was because I wanted Will to read it as well. And then I read Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I was excited to read this book because I'd heard so much hype about it, but unfortunately I don't think I loved it as much as everybody else did. Basically, this book follows a girl named Noemi who cousin sends them like a frantic letter. So Noemi goes to Mexico to this mansion that her cousin is staying at, and it's also set in the 1950s. The mansion has some spooky stuff going on. I don't know why, but lately I've been into spooky books because I also have read some spookier books as well in February that I'll talk about, of course, in my February wrap up. I don't know why, I've just been reading a lot of like spooky and like witchy books lately. I loved the dark atmosphere of this book. It was a vibe and definitely great for, you know, like Halloween times. But like overall, I just wasn't super intrigued by the story that much. It just, I don't know, it just didn't really like catch my attention all that much. But I will say I love they kept talking about mushrooms, and they specifically talked about morels, and hunting morel mushrooms is like something my dad and I do together every year. So like I just loved that they kept bringing that up because like that was like a personal connection I had with the story. But overall, I didn't have very many opinions on this book. It was kind of just all right, and I don't know, I was a little saddened because I was hoping to really like it. But yeah, I just gave it 3 stars. It was a very average reading month, I guess, in January. I need to figure out what like my average star rating was, because I think that's something I want to like implement in my like monthly stats page whenever I get around to making that in my bullet journal for this year, is like an average star rating. Okay, then I read Shiny Broken Pieces by Daniel Clayton and Sona Charipotra. This is the sequel to Tiny Pretty Things, which I read in December, I believe, and I really enjoyed it. Like, it was really interesting, and I loved the 3 main characters that we followed, and also the narrators for the audiobooks I think did a really good job portraying these characters. And like, I don't know, like especially the narrator who spoke for Gigi is like very, very serious. Like her tone, I don't know, I just love the tone that she brought to the audiobook. So I won't talk about this book too much because like I said, it's a sequel. So go check out my December wrap up if you wanted to hear more about Tiny Pretty Things. But I will say something that I forgot to say when I talked about Tiny Pretty Things is that one of the things I enjoyed the most about these books is of course the eating disorder representation that was in them, because they follow girls who go to like a ballet school, and ballet is very cutthroat, like more than I thought it would be. And so these books are very dramatic, very, very interesting, and I really, really enjoyed them. But one of the characters has a severe eating disorder, and that is one of the main things that is addressed in the book, and I just really appreciated the representation. I really enjoyed these 2 books, and I do have this author duo's new book that comes out soon. It's called Rumor Game, I think. Yeah, The Rumor Game, and it comes out in March. So I will be very excited to get to this one as well, because like I said, I really enjoyed those 2 books. And I gave Shiny Pretty Things 4 stars. And then I read You've Reached Sam by Dustin Tao. I feel like this book has been everywhere lately on like BookTube and Book Talk and like just everywhere. I feel like everybody's reading this book, and I heard like so many good things about it. I heard it was like heartbreaking and so sad, and of course the cover is beautiful, and so I was really excited to read this. I was really hoping it would break my heart, but unfortunately it didn't break my heart in the way that I wanted. You know, I love when a book can make me cry. It's like one of my favorite things ever, and unfortunately that did not happen. However, I did still like it, and it was still like sad, but it wasn't cry worthy, at least not to me. Basically, this book follows a character named Julie whose boyfriend recently died, and obviously that's a really sad time, and the book starts out with that. And so she calls his phone, you know, like just to hear like his voicemail, like to hear his voice one last time kind of thing, and he picks up. She spends most of the book like calling him and talking to him via their phone. She can't see him, but she can talk to him on her phone. It's only her phone specifically. So it is like overall like a sad story and like a sad topic, but there was never like, I feel like the sad things that get me the most are when like everything feels fine and then something really sad happens, and it's like that gut punch, you know, of like, oh my gosh, and like that's when I cry. And this book didn't have that because it was just overall kind of sad instead of like having like a specific sad moment that like makes me sob. I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would, unfortunately, so I just gave it 3 stars. It's still like on the higher end of 3 stars. I don't do 0.5s or like 0.25s just because it's easier, because like on Goodreads you can't mark that. I know you can on Storygraph, but I like things to be the same, so I just do like solid star numbers. And yeah, so that it does make it kind of tricky when I have so many 3-star books in 1 month, but some I feel like I liked more than others. Okay, and the last book I read this month was actually another graphic novel, and it was called Crumbs by Danny Sterling. So I read this book as an ARC that I got from the store that I work at, and I think it is going to be published in July, so there's kind of a bit of time to go until the book comes out, but I'm very excited for when it does because I really enjoyed this graphic novel. It was so cute. Remember how I said that Extraordinary is like one of my favorite graphic novels I've ever read? Well, this is also one of my favorite graphic novels I've ever read. I gave it 4 stars. It was adorable. Basically, it's just about witches. Like, they're just cute little witches, and it's like a very like fluffy, cute witch story. And they have like little phones, and their phones have little like creatures in them that are like, hi, I hope your day is wonderful, you got a text from this person. Like, they're so cute. It follows 2 main characters, Ray and Lori, and kind of just like their stories and how they met. And they kind of both have their own separate issues, but they also are together, and like there is a little bit of like a romantic relationship between them, and it's so adorable. It's just about their lives, and it's just so good. It's great. It's so cute. And I'm so excited for when it comes out because I read it in black and white because the ARC was written in black and white, but the finished copy is going to be in color. So I'm really thinking about buying a finished copy because I'm just, oh, it would be so nice to have that because it'll be so pretty in color. But yeah, it was so adorable. I highly recommend it. Definitely a great book to end the month on. Alright, so those are all the books I read in January. I hope you all enjoyed. Did you read any of these books? Let me know down below, or like let me know what you read in January. What was your favorite book you read in January? Let me know. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure you're subscribed down below so you don't miss any future videos. And if you want to follow me on social media, all my links are in the description box as always. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! I just